I come home from work sometimes. I come home from my job. I had a hard day at the office, dealing with a bunch of rubber snakes. One of the kids is in the driveway. He's shooting skeet with my rifle. He has your mother's eyes. I think he should give them back. Good evening, colleagues and associates across town and across the globe. I'm your host, Paul Colby. This is Public Affairs Public Access. As usual and as always, we're going to take you on a merry-go-round, a roller coaster ride, a romp through the underworld here as we talk about public events and what is actually happening, what is the story behind the various stories that you're hearing on other news media. As usual, no holds barred here. We have sources that are deep sources, and we tell the truth as we know it. Or sometimes we tell a version of the truth as we know it, or sometimes we tell you that you can't afford not to hear this, and you also can't afford to do anything about it. But anyway, it's that time of year, and it's that time of the decade when a lot of stuff's going down, some of it entertaining, some of it disturbing, some of it very political. So, I myself have just returned from the Olympic Games that are going on right now, and that's where I want to start tonight's discussion, because when I returned, I came back with a medal. Yes, I came back with a medal which I won along with a number of other people for men's collective amnesia. And I don't actually remember much more about it, except that I came back with this medal. Now, some of you may be wondering why it's not gold or bronze or silver for that matter. And I have to tell you something that I know because I've been at the Olympics. The expenses had to be cut in certain areas because it costs a whole lot of money to wreck parts of Brazil to put up the proper facilities to host an event like is going on right now. And in cutting corners, they decided it's better to give out medals that are either plastic or foam rubber or cardboard. But understand, they're still medals. I'm happy I got mine, and I wish I could tell you more about it. A lot of people have asked me since I've been back from the Olympics, why did they choose Brazil? Why Rio? Well, there's a few reasons for that. The International Olympic Committee, of course, always prefers to have the host country be one which is having some sort of constitutional or other political crisis, usually one inspired by CIA support for some kind of a coup. And so they qualified on that grounds. And they also qualified on this ground. It's been 20 years, the 20th anniversary of the invention of fried chicken by Dr. Felix Pronto, who was a Brazilian sanitation engineer. Fried chicken, if you did not know, used to be the #1 go-to food of the Olympians, the energy source, the I have to have this to live fuel that so many of the athletes who compete at that level used to swear by. I'm going to explain in a few minutes that they don't anymore, but those are the two main reasons why Brazil was the host for the Olympics, which are going on right now. As always, to try to make things more relevant to the international community, the games include some new events which are here based on real-world type situations where the athletes have to perform mightily. First new event, boarding an airplane. This is like a timed event. Who can make their way onto the plane fastest? And in order for this to be a highly competitive event, Brazil had to restructure some airports to look just like those in the United States, complete with TSA guards and complete with body cameras and the whole 9 yards. So people have been doing their best to break the old time record, which was 45 minutes to board for a flight of less than 45 minutes. We don't know yet who's going to win because, well, I have to tell you the truth. Some of the people, especially for the USA competitors, weren't able to make their flights to Rio, so the event is running a little behind. But after that one is over, there's another new event which is about finding your car in the parking lot. And of course, it won't actually happen until they've boarded the plane and they get off, and now they're supposed to go find the car that they rented or the car that they brought along. Now, there have been a few people already jumping the gun, and the problem that seems to be going on is that many people find the car and then drive off, and they're not supposed to do that. In other words, they're stealing the cars. But we'll see how that turns out. It's an event that's still in progress. Another one, pretty complicated to look at, involves extricating this is how it was phrased: extricating politicians and others from compromising situations. And when I say extricating, I mean by whatever mechanical means you can find to extricate them from wherever they are. And actually, this event seems to have it seems like just practice for getting Julian Assange out of the Ecuadorian embassy, if you want to know what my people think. Because so far nobody's been able to do it using any of a number of mechanical devices or clever spy-type hardware and software, let's put it that way. There are some other, there is another event that I do have to show you a picture of because it confused the hell out of me when I first saw this, and it involves what are called invisible horse riders. It's an invisible horse riding event. There you see these little ponies apparently just going around in circles, and it turns out there were never any riders at all. Somebody apparently managed to get this prank inside the gates of the Olympics, and it was confused for an actual event because these little ponies are actually robotic. You know about the self-driving cars that Detroit is going to sell us soon, and the other, foreign car manufacturers. You see some test models on the road now of cars that drive themselves. Well, these were little bitty horses that drive themselves, for what that's worth. I'm not sure what's competitive about it necessarily, but there were any number of exciting events there. I couldn't get to all of them, but I enjoyed some of the 200-meter bailout. The preference pole vaulting was very interesting this year because, of course, it's got a political slant, and in all of these election years, that's what happens. Nocturnal shoplifting, that was also very popular, but like the parking lot event, it seems to have backfired a little bit because people are shoplifting and not bringing things back after they're finished with the competition. And I was really a little disappointed in the patio boxing because I've seen more violent confrontations at some of the Christmas parties I've been to over the years. Anyway, it's not all about the competitive events, as you know. There's a built-in happy hour now that's been going on for some time because people remember Dick Cheney with a great deal of fondness. I stopped in for one of the bring your own bottle events, and it was a clothing optional event. And you know, those Olympians, when they let go, they well, maybe you don't know, but it was a memorable event. These Cheney happy hours sometimes go on for many hours. The Olympics, I should point out, always generate profitable sidelines for some people. And that's true this year as well. There's a book that's very popular right now. It's heading up the New York Times bestseller list. It's called Eat Like a Champ, Not a Chump. And it's based on giving you the inside about what Olympic athletes eat, what they use to power their bodies. It's by Dr. Jim Nostick. Now that's interesting. I never noticed before, because I think this guy's name is really Dr. Jim Nastic. Dr. Jim Nastic. I remember now, he said he was going to write this book under a pseudonym, but it's not much of a pseudonym, is it? Dr. Jim Nostick. My goodness, he doesn't even believe what he's saying. Anyway, the book is very interesting. For example, the North Lithuanian rugby team, almost all of the guys on that team have a diet that is specifically about not eating anything with 4 legs. So if you think about that, most of the things we eat do have 4 legs, but I suppose they could eat any number of birds with 2 legs, or any number of centipedes, or that type of insectivoid character. And I'm not sure what it's supposed to do with you, the 4-leg abstinence, but it's popular this year, I'm telling you that. There's also the virtually French sprinter, Valerie Ballyhoo. He always eats with his sunglasses on. And it doesn't really matter what he eats so much. He just thinks the food works better for him when he's wearing sunglasses. And another thing I found out from the book, the Russian wrestler, you may know Vladivsky Samasol. He only eats things that a New Zealand fur seal would eat. So it's called this is a surprise, the New Zealand fur seal diet. Anyway, now that you've heard some of the best information, you don't really have to run out and buy the book, because it's a bunch of eating regimens that most of you are not going to adopt for yourself. I'll tell you that right now. Since I was at the Olympics, I just have to mention something else. You probably don't see it on the TV coverage, but when somebody wins a medal and their national anthem is being played, well, it's being played in a polka rendition, because apparently polka is the unofficial punk music of Brazil. I certainly didn't know that when I went there. And corporate sponsorship, as always, is something that creates some bad vibes for some people. For example, big sponsors like Coca-Cola are there, and how do they show their influence through these games? Well, for all the people that have a swimming event, things have been pretty complicated, because if you look underwater, and I think we've got a slide, yeah, I'm not sure if that's a Coca-Cola or a Mountain Dew or a Sprite or all 3, but I personally wouldn't be swimming in that kind of water, and that may account for some of the slower times that you see, you know, the viscosity of these products. But that's not as bad as what some of the other sponsors have done. Now, as you know, athletes who win an event are used to getting medals, even if this year they're plastic and foam rubber and cardboard. But in some cases, if Dow has something to say about it, you get a glass of ancient, well, they call it ancient orange, but we know what it is. It's orange agent juice, or orange juice agent, or juicy anyway, it doesn't look healthy, nor do the Big Macs that get substituted for the foam rubber medals. So a couple of people who won the 24-hour sleepover were so angry that they wore masks. They just didn't even want to be recognized when they accepted that award. It's a sad state of affairs. But I'll tell you what, the Olympics is not the only game in town. Here in America, of course, America, the game is always politics, especially in a presidential election year. And this year, with the Trumpster and the Clintonistas, well, we've got a spectacle going on that rivals any we've ever seen. Now, as for Donald Trump, things are continually going on in his campaign. And when I say going on, I mean you can't tell from one day to the next. He just recently had his third or fourth shakedown of the staff. Shakedown of the staff reminds me of one of those dances that you do at the office Christmas party, and maybe all of these staff shakedowns are a way of trying to subliminally reach people who like modern dance. I'm not sure. I'll tell you what, he was not doing very well with women voters. We know that. And so I wasn't surprised, and you probably weren't either, that this year he went looking for advisors, and it just turned out that Roger Ailes was able to take a little time off from Fox News to advise him on women's issues. So there's probably going to be some interesting movement there. But the economic plans of the Donald really are interesting to me. For manufacturing, for example, he says we can be this was a big speech he gave in Detroit a few days ago, talking about manufacturing silly hats here in America, and chicken repellent. I didn't realize we'd gone out of the business, and miniature hair conditioners. Those are some giant steps. There was some theme in this last speech about raising taxes on welfare millionaires, and about how we could make our own Chinese food here instead of relying on the Chinese. And a lot of this kind of silly talk, if you want my opinion, has been fueling the Dump Trump movement. It's fueling it in such a way that now people are thinking, some Republicans is who I'm talking about, are thinking that maybe a big picture of Ronald Reagan ought to take the place of the Trump campaign, or maybe some raffle where an ordinary American could be elected at random to fill the shoes of the Donald. And there's even some talk that the engineering department in Flint, Michigan, as a collective, might substitute for Don. But you got to admit, the man has made insults into a national obsession. He has, because whether you approve or not, it looks like Americans, by and large, are just accepting insults as part of the game. But not everybody. Donald is famous for rating women that he sees. People like his daughter get a 10, you know, but a lot of people are getting 2s, and some of the people that get 2s are not very happy about it. In fact, one wrote a book. And I was reading a bit of it today. I'm a 2, but there's a lot of 1s out there. A lot of 1s out there. This lady, Meredith Terrier, sounds pretty bitter to me. Other people are looking at insults in a kind of erudite sort of academic fashion, if you want to call it that. So in addition to Yes, I'm a 2, we have a new book now about sarcasm in the Middle Ages. This is by Dr., and sometimes he calls himself Dr. Abernathy Dudingo. And to tell you the truth, in some academic circles, he's considered a crank. He's also written previously about window washing in the Middle Ages. And in addition to that, he's written about tight shoes and the tyranny of milk. And I'm not sure what the tyranny of milk really is. It's about 700 pages, and I haven't got that far. But if it turns out to be interesting, I'll report back to you later. Another book spurred by the insult-happy Donald Trump is one called Trashing Bozos While Sounding Respectful. This is written by Dr. Marvin Pod. And if I remember correctly, Dr. Marvin Pod used to be a rock musician. He doesn't have very much to say that you or I couldn't have said in our own books on the subject. But in other words, I'm giving it a D. You can skip that one. Donald, before I leave this subject of Donald Trump and his many missteps, people have been wondering about his ties with Mr. Putin. When I say Mr. Putin, I could say strongman Putin or the irascible Putin or whatever, but you know who I'm talking about. And when people have asked Donald what it is he likes about Putin, his quote last week was, "I like his socks." And I know from my research and what my staff has turned up that both Donald and Mr. Putin are fans of Alien Abductions, and they both like far-out disco music, so that should explain something. His relationship with Mr. Trump is not something that's going to defer him from his White House bid, I can tell you that. And one way I can tell you that it's absolutely certain is that I have some NSA surveillance of the new White House that Donald is building right now. It's not far from where I live, actually. So after I got this picture, I went and had a look myself. I found a room, or well, a suite of rooms actually being built for Mr. Putin in the new White House. And these include, there's some nice pool tables up there. There's some maps of the Ukraine, and there's a case of vodka. Now, you would expect it to be fine Russian vodka, but I looked at the case, and it's Kwanhu vodka. You know how Donald likes to make deals, and I guess he made a deal on some great Chinese, well, I don't know where it comes from, really. Anyway, that's enough for Donald. There's excitement going on the other side as well, as you know. It turns out that all the talk about the DNC being biased against Bernie Sanders turned out to be true because things got leaked just at the same time that the convention was going on in Philadelphia. And some of these things were blistering. For example, you saw the one about the Martian that had Bernie Sanders' affair with a Martian banjo player. Don't we have a picture of that story from the, yeah. I thought we did, yes. Actually, this is so salacious that if you haven't read it yourself already, I shouldn't be reading something like that in a family hour, you know. But they also cast doubts about Bernie's basic intelligence, questioning whether or not he understood why the chicken wanted to cross the road. And then they really got down and dirty, saying Bernie spent that money given to him by his supporters on a rare, collectible 1997 Volvo. And, of course, he denied it. And I don't think there's any proof of it. But once these stories started getting aired, the DNC and the Hillary campaign, they got pretty worried. And they didn't really want the attention to be focused on these bad emails showing their pranks here to undermine the Sanders campaign. So instead, they started playing a blame game. First thing out of their mouths, well, the Russians did it. Mr. Putin did it. Something like that. Somebody hacked our files, and ooh, we are mad. And as they were pointing at the Russians, you know, it's like just saying, bad dog, bad dog. Well, no surprise that in None of Your Business Week, just after those stories came out, a dog says that he was responsible for the hacking. In fact, the story said, how I hacked the DNC and other stories. And the dog didn't have a formal name. He was just called Bad Dog. He wound up a couple of days later on TV being interviewed. And when he was being interviewed, he changed his tune completely. He said, you know what, it was a story. I made it up because it wasn't me. It was another bad dog. It was another bad dog. So give yourself a chance to breathe, because Time Magazine just came out with a dynamite story suggesting that the real dog that hacked the DNC files does have more dirt that he's going to flood the market with. Sad story, isn't it? But you know what? It looks like some of that bad news has already made its way to Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, because he just said on the internet yesterday, I saw it myself, he saw what was being posted by the dog, and he said that Clinton's caboose is in trouble. He didn't say he had the files from the dog, but I guess we can start putting two and two together, huh? Or could we? Well, I think we can, because you know, these things happen so fast. As soon as Julian Assange said he had more files, we see another thing show up on the internet. This is a website by one Hillary Clinton-Deaf, I believe is how her name goes. And the website says, I really don't need the money. I really didn't need any of this money. Now that's just offensive to me, but I'll tell you more about that later. We were able, my staff and I, to dig up some of these things that haven't yet been released by WikiLeaks, and I want to show you a check. It's one of many checks that we've looked at, and it comes from the Happy Hedge Fund managers out in New York. $1 million check made out to Hillary's campaign, and it's signed by Powell Webley Valparaiso, who I think later becomes an astronaut, or once was an astronaut. The important thing about this is the memo at the bottom, and I don't know if you can read it on your screen, but it says, not intended to purchase political influence. Well, I'll be dadgum. You know, almost everybody who paid money into the campaign also paid money into the Clinton Foundation. Have a look at this one. Yeah. Now this is the Happy Frackers. Excuse me. The Happy Frackers. And the check here, it also says it's not for political influence. And in this case, it's signed by Jim Nastic, who probably is going to write a book about it, if I know Jim Nastic. But anyway, excuse me, these are just a few of the things that have come out already, so we can probably expect to see more. But one thing that these two unpopular political candidates agree on, at least at this point, is being opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's what they say. Now, many of Trump's supporters are opposed because they have it confused with something also on the internet called the Transgender Pacific Partnership, and so they're always against that. But I've been looking at the text of this Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it is very, very confusing, where it's talking about each party, and here it's a chord or accordion. Each party this is complying with requests that make no sense to me, and they involve shoe styles. Okay, I didn't realize that this was an agreement about shoe styles, but it also involves parties of the first part agreeing with parties of the second part about requests from parties that are not parties. But look at this next section. This is what really troubles me. This is stuff that is exempted. This is exempted from any kind of temporary tariffs. This includes snack foods for mystery beavers. It includes goods intended, well, I don't understand that at all. Undrilled bowling balls, which I suppose there are a lot of those that we don't ever hear about, the undrilled bowling balls, or advertising materials for producers of concrete things unrelated to shoe designs. Well, whatever this partnership is really supposed to be about, the bad press that it's getting comes from several people writing books about it. Let me see if I have the internet. I don't know the internet address, but you can find a copy of this book on the internet. It's by Dr. Pronto, and he's been on TV, and the book is called Trading Shoes for Invisible Horses. And so we know about the shoe style language in the TPP, and the invisible horses, that sounds very familiar. I know, you know, this guy, like gymnastic and like a couple of these other authorities, is regarded in academic circles as something of a crank. Let's be frank about that. So, but if you want to read more, this is where some of the negativity is coming from, and it's what people are worried about. And I know that the NSA has this man under surveillance right now. He has a shoe project. It's somewhere in Brazil, and he has a bunch of invisible robotic horses, which I suppose all of us are going to want pretty soon if this thing passes. But my goodness, it's hard to keep up, isn't it? Anyway, that's what's going on in politics, and as I say, it's not the only game in town, but it's a pretty complicated game. So I'd rather talk about entertainment here for a few minutes, because there are entertaining things going on. You probably know that Ron Howard has a documentary coming out about the Beatles in September, and this involves the early touring years, you know, before they went off the road and then just did things in the studio until they broke up. But in those early days, Ron Howard has gathered all this film and some music that you haven't heard before, and it should be pretty interesting to see because it goes way, way back. But I have to tell you the truth, he didn't go back as far as my people have, because we've turned up some things that that they didn't even turn up. Did you know? I mean, well, first of all, most of you know Pete Best was the drummer for the Beatles before Ringo Starr was the drummer for the Beatles. But even before Pete Best, there were other drummers. One of them is famous as one of the main figures in the Cold War. That's Fidel Castro. And I suppose that you didn't know Fidel started out not just running a revolution in Havana, Cuba, but actually drumming with the Beatles. Drumming with the Beatles. Now, at that time, I don't think the Beatles were expected to be anything more than, well, some sort of concrete jazz group, because they really weren't very talented, and they didn't have electrical instruments, and they didn't really have any gigs to speak of. But somewhere along the line, they got a break, and that was to play as third fiddle, certainly not opening the show, but playing at a place called Hardy's Dumpster, It's kind of legendary in the rock world. At Hardy's Dumpster, the head of the bill was Marvin Pod and the Mystery Beavers. And you may have forgotten about them, but one time they were top of the heap. As I got to tell you something here. Even before they backed up, Marvin, I got to tell you, there were rumors going around about other personnel in the Beatles, which is basically how they got this job. Now, you probably have heard, if you've read a bunch of history about the Beatles, you probably heard the tale that Jimmy Hoffa was also in the group at some point. And it is true, Jimmy Hoffa wrote a book, Don't Bury Me Until I'm Actually Dead, and in that book he says that he used to work as 1/4 of a famous pop foursome, but it wasn't the Beatles. It was Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Hoffa at that time, and then later after he left, he would be replaced by Neil Young. But he did get the Beatles on the ticket there with Marvin, and Marvin Pod, if I can just digress here for a minute, it was long rumored to be the grandson of Frank Sinatra by somebody. He couldn't sing very well, but the Mystery Beavers were very good musicians. You had, in that group, you had Powell Webley Valparaiso, who would later become an astronaut, and you had Pheromona del Tunabago. Very, very promising group. Anyway, when they played there at Hardy's Dumpster, you may have noticed on that sticker it said that there was free admission with Puma photos, because in those days people didn't actually pay to get into some of these clubs. They brought I don't know, you could call it wampum beads, or you could call it, trading, one of those secret economies. And this was influenced by Fidel being in the group and stuff like that. But Puma photos were used for a while. Then what happened is that at a certain point, the Beatles decided to become electric. And even though Ron Howard didn't find it, we found some audio from John Lennon talking about that period. Do we have that audio that we could play there? Several times over the years, is that right? Well, yeah, when we first started out, we were doing polkas mostly. And then Paul said, let's give a shot at this Lithuanian folk music. But it didn't go down well, so one day we saw some amplifiers in a shop, and we said, let's do this, let's plug in, and the rest is history. Well, there you have it. Basically, after Fidel, it was actually Fidel came into some money and bought them some amps, and then they got a gig at the Cabin. That's what happened next. At the Cabin, and I think we have a poster from there too. This is where they became famous. It was the place. The motto, you might remember, where the truly hip shake their hips. It's like the staff shake-up was a dance that they called at the time. Here they have their explosive new guitar sound, the explosive new guitar sound, and here, interesting, it continues this policy of getting in without money, which is interesting. I mean, that's not covered in any of the Cold War textbooks that I remember reading, much less any of the Beatles books. But here, ladies were admitted free with New Zealand fur seal hairdos or pictures, one of the two. So now the Beatles, and this isn't in Ron Howard's movie, by the way. This is all stuff I'm telling you that we found out. The Beatles are now an electric group, but they don't have a record. And in their mind, they've got to have a hit record if they're going to go anywhere, right? They've got to have a hit record. So another guy steps into the picture here to kind of deliver what they need. And who do you think it might be? Donald Trump. Donald Trump. Donald has another book out this campaign season. I don't know if it's out yet. I have an advance copy. It's a book called Things I Never Thought to Mention. And there's an entire chapter about his association with the Fab Four, or at that point they were still called the Fab Six or Seven. Don says, I was the popular one. I always got the girls, and they were so jealous, they being the other guys. And that's why he eventually got kicked out of the group. But not before he did them a big favor. He used his fortune, which mostly came from his dad. I think you know part of that story. His dad gave him $1 million, and the first thing he did was to record a record with the Beatles. It was mostly the Beatles. Don Trump was just playing tambourine, but he got credited for more than that. With a little help from my dad, came out way, way before any of the other singles that you've heard. It only sold 8 copies, and I actually have one of those copies along with a certificate of authenticity. Donald Trump is credited along with Lennon and McCartney as being the writer, and on the B side of that record you had I Should Have Known Betty. Now, we don't know for sure about Betty, but I think Betty may be that Meredith Carrier woman who turned out to be a 2, but she never had any number 1s, okay? If you follow what I'm saying. In any case, that's what we found out that Ron Howard did not find out about those early touring days of the Beatles. Now, I have to say, I already, speaking with the insiders, I know that another movie is coming after this one in September, and this will deal with some of the things most people don't know about that the Beatles did after they broke up, what they did individually. For example, John Lennon, we could call him Lennon the inventor, tried to market, he wasn't very successful, market a singing cigarette and an early form of invisible horse and a miniature hair conditioner. But, you know, most of that, you don't know anything about it if you read the papers. Nope. McCartney bought the Vatican Library. I mean, he had a little money left over, and he started a string of filling stations in Wyoming. And not that many, about 17, something like that. George Harrison, he went to Trump University at Donald's suggestion, and he financed some sheepdog experiments. I don't know too much about those yet, but my staff is working on it. And of course, Ringo Starr located the Holy Grail. I say of course, I mean that's because we had those secret documents a long time ago, but it's just coming to the attention of Ron Howard now. So there you have it. Go watch the movie, but remember we told you the parts that aren't even in the movie, right? Those days are long gone, dead and gone, we could even say. And while we're on the subject of dead and gone, I want to talk about something new that's happening in not only the print media but also on the internet, and that is obituaries for companies. Let's see if I can turn one up. Well, actually, I don't have an internet connection here, but I do have some data I brought along. You may be familiar with Puma Photos Distribution Company of America, Incorporated. And recently, a None of Your Business Week story asked if they were down for the count. In the last couple of weeks, it's clear that they are down for the count. According to their obituary, which has recently been published in the Up Against the Wall Street Journal, the company expired this was last week, after a 22-year struggle with vector enhancements. Let's see, they were successful in the 50s and the 60s. That was when Puma photos were used to get into some of these nightclubs. That's what we were saying, in festivals. The company attempted over the years to diversify with a line of mystery beaver pictures. Mystery beaver pictures. Of course, I don't have any of those, or if I did, I would show you. They're not the only company that's gone down here within the last just a little while, and I mean just a little while. There's the Concrete Thing Company, and they make concrete things, or they used to make concrete things. Now, as a practical matter, their obituary is pretty long, so I'm not going to read it. But the thing is, they used to make a whole lot of different concrete things. I'm not sure what this one in the picture is, but now it turns out that the same things are being made with either plastic or foam rubber or cardboard. And that's why they went out of business. Another company, I just saw this obituary yesterday, and it's sad. The Octagon Group, Octagon and Octagon Commentary, specifically of North Pacific. Now, I was heavily invested in that company for a while, probably like a lot of you. It looked like there was going to be a big market for Octagon Commentary. Some of the earliest Octagon Commentary just kind of spruced up not only Fox News and CNN, but even the network news. It was reported on virtually every night, and then the market just collapsed, just totally collapsed. But I have to tell you something. This is what's weird about this, is that the Octagon Commentary Group of the South Pacific, which I didn't invest in, is still doing very well indeed. And I've been trying to put together a little portfolio of the commentary of the South Pacific arm, but I didn't have time to finish it here for this show. If we can get it together, we'll bring it to you next time, because the South Pacific commentary is pretty amazing and illuminating. Now, one last one. This is a rumor at this point, but so you could call this a rumored obituary for Sewers or Us. Sewers or Us, as you can see here, they even made sewers here in the city of Houston, although they're not from around here. But these people are bitter. Specifically, their head man, Mr. Maurice Kelper von Schuba, he is really bitter about the erosion of his market. He's so bitter that he said on television just the other day that America is an open sewer, and that is really why. Well, that's basically why they're going out of business, because America's an open sewer. Now, I don't know if we have it, but if we do still have some data here on Donald Trump's tax returns, I believe that Mr. Maurice Kelper von Schuba was actually listed as a defendant on one of Donald's tax returns. Yeah, well, I may be mistaken there. Yes, indeed he was. Yeah, there we are, Maurice Kelper von Schuba, and here he is listed as a protege of Donald Trump, who is, according to this tax document, which I forgot to tell you I obtained this. He's too young to vote, but you know, Donald is kind of fast and loose with the facts. And look at this. Here's Pheromona del Tunabago. She was part of the Mystery Beavers. That's interesting. She doesn't have a Social Security number. And there's the astronaut, Powell Wobley Valparaiso, who also donated $1 million on behalf of the one of those groups to Clinton's campaign. And Mumu Transpetroslavic, I think that is the real name of one of those other people who wrote the book critical of the Transgender Pacific Partnership. And it's all starting to fit together, at least in my mind it is. I want to talk for a minute here. Before I go back to something entertaining, I just have to cover this voter situation here now that we're back into the political arena. In Texas this year, it's always the case that the Republicans come up with voter ID requirements before a general election with the specific intent, hear me out, of keeping certain people from voting. And you know that, and I know that, regardless of the fact that election fraud, voter fraud specifically, is what they say is the basis for these voter ID procedures. We know that. We know that's not the case. And recent Supreme Court decisions are striking down some of these voter ID laws that we see. All right, so what are you going to be able to do when you want to vote in Texas this general election? What do you need to vote? First thing you need is, there are some options. First of all, a Blockbuster card. They figure that nobody has those anymore. You can also use a traffic ticket, especially if you were stopped. And you're black. Third, you can use a diploma from Trump University or similar institution. I don't know any similar institutions. You can use your motor home as an ID, and here they're obviously assuming most people will not go to the trouble of actually bringing their motor home along. Or you can use a $50 bill. Point being, they aren't necessarily going to give it back. All right, they're not going to give it back. So there you have it. I just want you to be aware of what you can do when and if you want to vote. Next thing I just got to get off my chest. I don't want to get into the argument with a lot of people about whether we should get rid of Confederate generals' names as names for schools. I don't want to be in the middle of that debate. People have very strong opinions on either side. But I will tell you this, now that we've gone ahead and done that in the Houston Independent School District, I think we could have been more creative with the names we chose for some of these schools where we had to change the names. Do you get what I'm saying? For example, Robert E. Lee, I would have changed that to Skinny Nurses Hangover Academy, just on general principles. And Reagan, that's had a name change, but I would have called that the mostly Tibetan Hula Messenger Prep School. You see what I'm saying? We need some verve and we need some modern interpretations in these iconoclastic names for high schools. So Lanier, in my book, would have been Would-Be Aviation Pioneers Junior High. And Jefferson Davis, that would have been tuba-friendly New Western World School and Restaurant. See what I'm getting at? We need creativity. The only place you find real creativity these days is in games, and there's a game everybody's playing right now. You've probably seen people running around with their phones playing these games. I didn't know what it was, but my uncle, he told me I should get with it. Here's what my uncle said about this game that's going around right now.
This is a exciting game everyone is playing. You just walk around with your phone, your smartphone, and you are looking for the Pokemon, because you could be walking anywhere in the city and all of a sudden, here's the Pokemon.
You know, it's a strange game. My nephews and nieces told me I'd be able to pick it up easily. And I turned on my phone. I looked at the map. I couldn't understand what it was telling me to do. I mean, sure, I heard somebody next to me telling lizard jokes, and I saw somebody in a cow suit, and I had a flat tire, but I couldn't understand this game. I just kept seeing monsters everywhere, and most of them looked like just monster versions of me. So, I mean, it must be that my phone somehow was picking up my image and doing something with it and then showing me places on a map. And I was supposed to do something about it. I've been trying to figure out exactly what I'm supposed to do. I mean, it's very confusing to me, and it's why I can't stay in a chronological linear format here making sense tonight, because my head it's stopped. It stopped. Wow, I'm glad that stopped, because I keep hearing this voice in my head that says I need to go jump in a lake, and that's not something I would normally do. I think it's something that this damn game is driving me to, but I'm going to try to hold on, because I need to be back with you guys again, ladies and gentlemen, to keep you updated on everything that's going on out there in the big wild world. And that's my job, and that's why I come here on Public Affairs, Public Access, periodically, to let you know what I found out. So we found out that there's some weird stuff going on at the Olympics, and that the political nightmare is not over yet, and we found out that well, there's a lot of things that are not entertaining about what's supposed to be entertaining us. But sometimes chicken, fried chicken, sometimes feathers, right? And I'm just going to tell you that it was very therapeutic for me to come here tonight and join you, because it's been rough out there, not only at the Olympics, but on the campaign trail and in my own home, being traumatized by these polkas I'm hearing every time I turn around. Until next time, I hope it clears up for all of you.
I come home from work sometimes. I come home from my job. I had a hard day at the office, dealing with a bunch of rubber snakes. One of the kids is in the driveway. He's shooting skeet with my rifle. He has your mother's eyes. I think he should give them back. Sometimes I come home from the warehouse. I come on home without a map. I put my foot down on the pedal, and I rarely need help. I'm wearing